Welcome to my channel where we discuss astrotheology and past historical events that seem to be relevant to our current timeline. So I want to get into the whole Valentine's Day symbolism from history. It's a very historical date, the February 14th and February 15th date. We have discussed before about the Roman Empire created Rome on February 15th. I'm not going to go into that today. That was called Lupernalia Day, basically because Romulus and his twin brother were raised by a wolf. And this was where the name Rome came from. So it's a very historical event. I have spoken to you about this before in the David Bowie Valentine's Day video that I did, and how he's referencing that Valentine's Day is the day that something's going to happen. And it seems to be, related to New York, right? But we also have, our current events, what they're happening right now, and we have this big truck convoy, and, they're there and they're trying to stand for freedom. And this all goes back to Socrates. Socrates was, well, they say, put to death by his own choice in the end on February 15th. Now, this was happening in BC, 399 BC. So there's a lot of history relating to freedom and also Captain Cook. Now, this video is going to go into all Captain Cook, and because he got murdered on Valentine's Day, right? So there's lots of layers of history all tying to Valentine's Day. This Valentine's Day, we have a Venus-Mars conjunction, and they are lovers, right? And Vulcan was married to Venus, and I'll do a whole separate video on that because that's all the mythology of Venus and Mars. And I need to do a whole separate video. But this one is just going to be on the symbolism or the repetitive theme of what happens on February 14th to February 15th in regards to people dying, sacrifices, and the whole theme of how it's about freedom. Socrates was accused for propriety for speaking against the gods. It all started when the Spartans tried to take over, well, they did take over Athens, and they killed 5% of the population and confiscated properties from the citizens. Now, this happened 32 years prior to Socrates' death. But he, saw that Athens was never the same after. So he, was speaking out and saying, that the way the democracy was not being run correctly. He ended up taking poisonous hemlock. That was his sentence. And he could have left. He could have admitted he was guilty for speaking out, but he chose not to, and he chose to take the poison. He was also the teacher of Xenophon and Plato. Now, Plato created the Republic, right? The document. So, it's all to do with a democracy that allows the individual citizen to have freedom of thought and speech. This is what they were advocating, and this is why they're considered rebels of their time. These are some of the opinions of academia and people that have researched history. Socrates was a martyr for his purity. He was simply hated for his intelligence. The government crushed his free spirit. And this is the opinion of the mainstream media of the day today. He posed a threat to the democratic government because he was speaking out. But he truly was a pioneer of teaching rational thought and questioning dogma and uncontrolled authority. So this is really what's going on in our timeline currently. So the freedom movement that is going across the world right now because of the Canadian truckers, this was an Illuminati card. Now, somebody had mentioned to me that it ties to the Jimmy Hoffa card in the Illuminati deck. And so I did a little research on him, and he was born on February 14th. Now, Jimmy Hoffa represented the union workers, right? So he created unions, but he also got tied into the mafia because the mafia wanted to own the unions. Anyhow, he ended up going to prison because of, some, they wanted him out, I guess, also, but he did some wheeling dealing, whatever. He goes to prison. He ends up having a meeting to meet with the mafia at a restaurant, and then he disappears. They've never found his body, so he went missing. So he, basically was murdered. And this just ties into the whole trucker movement and what it represents, like for the freedom of the workers, the blue collar workers, to have a right to speak. Now, I watched a little clip on because they've just tried to find his body again recently, in I think last year. And when I watched the clip of a movie they did about his life story, it was talking about the truckers. The clip was in this little thing here. They said, "Oh, remember who brings your food to you, or who brings your gas to you, or how you get oil and gasoline to heat your house. It's the truckers." So it's just interesting that this is all tying in, but that the fact that he was born on February 14th is, I find that really curious, and it's all in the Illuminati cards. And it's kind of funny that his middle name is Riddle, because it does feel like a riddle. Now, you guys are great diggers and watchers out there. Somebody found this about Captain Cook's ship has just been refound, right? The Endeavour. And, it says here on the bottom of the ocean, 250 years after it reached Australia. Well, it's not exactly 250 years. It's actually 243 years, and that's really an important amount of years, because they tie into the Venus transits. Okay, how the Venus transit cycles work is on a 243-year cycle, and it brings us to this year from Captain Cook's visit to go watch the Venus transit, and he was on the Endeavour ship doing that. So the Endeavour ship was the ship for the 1769 transit of Venus, and he watched it from Tahiti. Yeah, so they watched Venus go across the sun. It happens like on these kind of weird kind of pattern. I'll explain that to you. But they also went to these islands, Bora Bora, Raiatea, and Huashin. And then they claimed them for Great Britain. So in September 1769, she anchored off New Zealand, becoming the first European vessel to reach the islands since Abel Tasman, 127 years earlier. So in April 1770, Endeavour became the first European ship to reach the east coast of Australia, with Cook going ashore at what is now known as Botany Bay. Endeavour was then sailed north along the Australian coast. She narrowly avoided disaster after running aground on the Great Barrier Reef, and Cook had to throw her guns overboard to lighten her. So Endeavour was beached on the Australian mainland for 7 weeks to prepare rudimentary repairs. Resuming her voyage, she limped into the port of Batava in October 1770, and that's modern-day Jahara. Her crew sworn to secrecy about the lands they had visited, so they didn't, they declared these islands for the British Empire, but they didn't want to speak about it. So Endeavour continued westward, rounded the Cape of Good Hope on 13th of March 1771, and reached the English port of Dover on July 12th, having been at sea for nearly 3 years. The ship was largely forgotten after her Pacific voyage, spending the next 3 years hauling troops and cargo to and from the Falkland Islands. This was all to do with the War of Independence, right? So, and then eventually historical evidence indicates the ship was sunk just north of Goat Island, which I find really funny because this all ties into Capricorn being the goat, right? He's the devil card. In Newport Harbor, along with 4 other British transports. Obviously, she's really special because NASA's space shuttle Endeavour was named after this ship, as was the command module of Apollo 15, which look a small piece of wood. Oh, that took a small piece of wood from Cook's ship into space. And the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule was christened Endeavour during the demo too. The ship is also depicted on the New Zealand 50-cent coin. So yeah, huge historical event, and they just discovered it. So it's almost like, the ghost of Captain Cook is coming back, right? So, and he was murdered on Valentine's Day in Hawaii. Yeah, so he was born on November 7th. They have two different calendar dates here, or October 27th, but this is all, the scales, Libra, where we have this blood moon on November 8th this year. So, that's interesting that that's his birth date, and then, his death, February 14th. But I want to go into how he died and basically what happened to him. Okay, so the tensions rose because he landed in Hawaii. Then they thought that he was a god because they were celebrating their lunar god. And then he left because he was doing this Northwest Passage, route. This is the blue route here. This shows that was his last route. And he's going up north to, map and stuff. So then it's so funny because they say, oh, you're a god, you're a god. So he goes off with his ship up to, and then his ship breaks down and he has to return back to Hawaii to get it fixed. And then they're like, whoa, you're not a god. Gods don't have to come back to get their ships fixed, right? So they started to get suspicious. So tensions rose and a number of quarrels broke out between the Europeans and the Hawaiians. And this happened at Kealakekula Bay. And it was because Cook asked, his mates to go and get wood from a burial ground. So I guess they needed wood. So he goes and tells them to steal wood from a burial ground. An unknown group of Hawaiians took one of Cook's small boats because they didn't like that. The evening when the cutter was later taken, the people had become insolent, even with threats to fire upon them. So Cook attempted to kidnap and ransom the king of Hawaii. And then the following day, February 14th, 1779, Cook marched through the village to retrieve the king. Cook took the king by his hand and started to lead him back to the ship. And then the natives started to try to get their king to realize he was a bad guy. I guess maybe he was elderly. I don't know. And then so then they did a revolt and they ended up killing Cook. They hit him over the head and then stabbed him. They also killed 4 other shipmen. So yeah, it was pretty nasty. But then just check this out. They ended up cooking Cook. I was like, what? They cooked him. So the body was disemboweled and baked to facilitate the removal of the flesh, and the bones were carefully cleaned for preservation as religious icons of fashion, somewhat reminiscent of the treatment of European saints in the Middle Ages. Some of Cook's remains, thus preserved, were eventually returned to the crew for formal burial at sea. So yeah, it was crazy. So this was such a huge shock to the British Empire because, Captain Cook was their, hero, right? Because he was going around, taking charge of, saying all these native lands were now the British Empire. And he was tricking them with, these blood moons. That's why all these blood moons are named after Captain Cook. But because he would say, look, I'm, here and I'm, authority and, I know when the moon's going to turn to blood. And then he would tell them and he'd go sit back on his ship and then, they would all bow down to him. So eventually, I guess these Hawaiians got suspicious, right? They were like, hey, something's up with this guy. His ship broke down and he can't fix it. So he's not a god. So, yeah, so it's interesting, how this was all happening when the War of Independence was happening in the United States. So the British Empire did not, were horrified that this hero was murdered, it made them look bad, right? Because they were losing the war in the United States and fighting, and well, this was 10 years after, but still, it made them look bad, right? It's just the whole thing that it looked like they were defeated, after they just had this war with the Americans. So it wasn't good for them. So they have a monument for him in this bay, and they're saying here in 1825, Admiral Lord Bryan, cousin of the famous poet, on the ship HMS Blondie, erected a monument to Cook. So this was, yeah, almost, well, what is it? 30, 60 years later. 60 years later. So they finally put a monument there. Blondie. She did that song, "The Tide is High," in New York City. So anyhow, this is the bay, and this is what it looks like then, and this is what it looks like now. This is just off one of the islands in Hawaii. The meaning of Kealakekua Bay means pathway of the gods, meaning the day of battle. It was also considered the merry monarch of Hawaii. But there's some volcano activity that was underwater, just like the tsunami that we had in the Pacific recently. They're saying a short single-day eruption in Mauna Loa volcano took place underwater in the Kalakaukea Bay. So that was in 1877. But this part is weird. So they have here a large white stone for the monument was built on the north shore of the bay on the order of Archibald Cleghorn and was deeded to the United Kingdom in 1877. The chain around the monument is supported by 4 cannons from the ship HMS Phantom. So it's like the Phantom. And they were placed with the breeches embedded into the rock in 1876. It marks the approximate location of Cook's death. So here's some interesting history about the Phantom. Why would they put the Phantom cannons on Captain Cook's grave? It's because, well, it was a British ship, obviously, and did help with some slaves being freed. But some treasure hunters have claimed that convoy that Phantom was escorting, the word convoy is there again, was laden with goods taken from the White House during the British raid on Washington, D.C. However, Phantom played no part in the Washington raid, and historians agree that the convoy carrying goods and customs revenue from the Castine. The site of Phantom's loss is marked today by the inscriptions on a large boulder near the wreck site of Prospect. So they're saying that, yeah, it's all, carved into stone there in Nova Scotia. So it's tying into Canada, and it's tying into a convoy. Okay, so I'm just like, the Phantom convoy. So I had to check out the sky when Captain Cook was murdered. And Venus is in the exact same location as this year on February 14th, right on the Cape of Sagittarius. This is the same location as Elvis and David Bowie was born, where their son was, and also the last Venus point for the Venus pentagram, which was on Elvis's and David Bowie's, I think the day after their birthday, was in this location as well. So it's very significant. And then the moon is in Capricorn with Mercury, and the sun is in Aquarius. There is a Cook asteroid because they say it's named after, different names of cooking, they say, but they also mention it's to do with Cook in Australia. So, there's names because he discovered Australia or he rediscovered Australia. But when he was murdered, Cook and Mars was in the Justice Libra constellation. So, this is war on justice. That's what Libra represents, justice. And it's also the death alchemic symbol, right? The actual symbol of Libra. And that to me is a little bit like, are you willing to die for justice, right? It comes down to that passion, because Mars is your warrior in you. And we see this when Socrates decided to take his poison rather than, admit guilt for something he didn't do. Vesta and Mars was also in Libra. Vesta virgins. It's really, you're standing up for your rights, right? To the point where you're willing to die. This is really Mars and Libra. It seems like in history, this is what it represents. Now, Socrates' death, he had Chiron almost in conjunction with Venus, which is love, and it was in the spiritual constellation of Pisces, which was, he was really standing up for his spiritual beliefs, right? Of what freedom is supposed to represent. So Chiron ends up dying. He's the centaur that teaches everyone how to heal themselves. And he taught Asclepius, who holds the snake in the Ophiuchus constellation, the upper house of Scorpio. And this is all to do with healing. He's also was the teacher of Achilles. And the whole mythology of Achilles' heel comes from Achilles watching Chiron die from a poisonous arrow falling on his foot, on his heel. And Chiron couldn't heal himself, and he ended up dying. But so there's this whole thing about, healing yourself to do with Chiron, and also willing to show your pain to help others, right? So that is fascinating that was there. And we also have Chiron in Pisces this year on Valentine's Day. And this Valentine's Day also has the Cook asteroid very close to the moon. The moon is on the gateway of man, right? This is really important location in the sky, the moon being in its own constellation, and it's also the manger of Christ. So, yeah, there's a lot going on in the sky. And the year that Captain Cook died, 1779, the Neptune-Jupiter had a conjunction. It was in Virgo, actually. It was on Zavijava. So to do with ascension, right? So that star is an important location in the sky. And now we have a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction on April 12th this year. So it's all the same energies, what I'm saying. It's all like layered, but we're the sky is repeating these same storylines. So after Captain Cook's death, the funny part is one ship was sent back to England to inform the Crown what happened. That job going to Ensign Blythe. Yes, who would later become Captain Blythe. The other ship stayed to collect the remains of Captain Cook. The Hawaiians resisted for a while. The English were horrified when the Hawaiians returned with a few bones, showing they had been boiled until the meat dropped off. Some bones of Cook were never returned. The horror was little overdone. In 1800 England, there was still public hangings and beheading, often with corpse left. So the hypocrisy of, hanging the average man and leaving their body, for everybody to see rotting in the town square was okay. But the fact that their precious Captain Cook was boiled and cooked was not okay, right? Because he represented the empire of the British Crown. Now, his name was James Cook. And now the whole Peter Pan story, Captain James Hook. Okay, and there are beliefs that this, storyline was named after Captain Cook, but it's really Captain Blythe. Okay, Captain Blythe, who ended up becoming the captain and taking over the ship after Captain Cook died, he was a nasty, nasty, nasty captain. And we have to get it all into that because the whole story of what happened to him in real life was the mutiny of the Bounty. So Captain Blythe goes to England and informs the Crown that Captain Cook was killed, and I guess they needed a new hero, so they made him Captain Blythe. And he was 33 years old, William Blythe, who had been sailing master on the HMS Resolution of Captain Cook last voyage and discovery. He was to sail to Tahiti, take on a load of breadfruit seedlings, and deliver what was termed bounteous cargo to the West Indies for cultivation as cheap, nutritious food for slaves. Okay, so they were feeding the slaves, right? So after finally arriving in Spithead on November 4th, it's like around Election Day, 1787, the Bounty was delayed 3 more weeks in port. An angry Captain Blythe attributed this delay to the Admiralty. If there is any punishment that ought to be inflicted on a set of men for neglect, I'm sure it ought to be on Admiralty for the 3 weeks' detention at this place during a fine fair wind, which carried all outward bound ships clear of the channel but me. Finally, after receiving permission to depart, Bounty left Spithead at Portsmouth, England, on the 23rd of December 1787, but Blythe was delayed. Strong winds and severe weather prevented the Bounty from getting down the English Channel. These delays were to make Blythe's task a very arduous one indeed, for they arrived at Cape during the winter storm season. For 30 days he attempted without success to make it westward around the Cape Horn as ordered. Finally, however, with most of the crew exhausted, becoming increasingly disgruntled, Blythe reluctantly turned around and made way for Cape of Good Hope and crossed the whole width of the Indian Ocean, then turned northeast into the Pacific, where he arrived at Tahiti around 10-month voyage on the 26th of October 1788. 10 more months with some 2,700 miles later, HMAV Bounty at last arrived at Tahiti on October 26, 1788. Blythe's ecstasy turned to anger when he learned that the breadfruit were not yet available to make the journey. The Bounty's late arrival brought them to Tahiti at the time when the breadfruits were in dormant period, during which they could not survive transplantation. So this resulted in a delay of another 6 months before Bounty could continue its mission to the West Indies, 6 months for his crew to enjoy the multiple pleasures of paradise. Blythe and the crew set about preparing more than 1,000 breadfruit plants for shipment to the Caribbean. During this period, Blythe allowed a number of the crew to live ashore to care for the potted breadfruit plants. Without the discipline and the rigid schedules of the sea, the men went native and reveled in the life and the loves of the idyllic islands. 3 crewmen helping to spend their days in the tropical paradise deserted, but they were captured by Blythe and flogged. So they got a taste of living in paradise, and you won't believe what happened next. I don't know if you guys know the Mutiny of the Bounty story, but it's a true story. And I really believe that he represents Captain Hook. He was nasty. So here's the breadfruit. It just hangs from the trees, and it's almost like a potato-like flavor. So they were, using this to feed slaves. Now, back to our timeline. I know that I've mentioned this before, when Trump was throwing paper towels at Puerto Rico after the hurricane, he was, all this memes were coming up with him holding paper towels of Bounty, right? And here's a shipwreck, and he's walking on water, right? Okay, so he's bringing our attention to the Mutiny of the Bounty story. Trump compares himself to the Mutiny of the Bounty movie villain, Captain Blythe. Okay, so what he's saying is he's the big bad guy. He's not your savior. He is going to make you fight for your freedom, because this is what the crew of the Bounty did. They got a taste of paradise, and they weren't going back on that ship and taking it anymore from Captain Blythe. And it's kind of like we're on a ship. I kind of feel like we are the ship, and the ship is sinking. Like we're on the Titanic, and you've got to jump out and save yourself. that's how I feel like all this alchemy to learn how to um, become out of the matrix and how to become to this higher state of consciousness is to see that this ship is is evil, right? It's evil. It's not for humanity how this whole world is run. It's for our own enslavement. And if you want to change the world, you have to jump ship or take over the ship. Donald Trump's taste in films is not much of a secret. In 2012, he gave Movie Line a list of his 5 favorite movies. Gone with the Wind, that means you're floating up, Citizen Kane, Goodfellas, The Godfather, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. After complaining about Parasite Oscars win, yeah, because we have a parasite in our world, and that is whoever is ruling this world and keeping us always in fear is the parasite. So it wins the campaign rally just 2 months ago. He mused, "Can we get like Gone with the Wind back, please? Sunset Boulevard, so many great movies." Now he's added another favorite film to his list. On Tuesday morning, Trump tweeted his love for the Mutiny of the Bounty. "Tell the Democratic governors that Mutiny of the Bounty was one of my all-time favorite movies. A good old-fashioned mutiny every now and then is exciting and invigorating thing to watch, especially when the mutineers need so much from the captain. Too easy." There you go. Yeah, it's too easy. Don't ask the captain to do it. You have to become your own mutineer. So the original Mutiny of the Bounty, there's many different films of it, but the original one came out in 1935, and Clark Gable was the head mutineer, Fletcher Christian. Now, what's kind of funny is that it was released, so you can't see the date there, November 8th. Okay, so November 8th, that ties into our blood moon again this year, right? So it's all linked together. So we're really starting to see this storyline and represents us. It represents us taking over our own ship. So this is the 1935 version, and then Marlon Brando ends up doing the one, I think, later on in the 60s. But yeah, James Cagney was sailing his boat off the coast of Catalina Island. So the movie was being filmed around Catalina Island. And so there was another tragedy, additional tragedy nearly occurred during the filming when an 18-foot replica of the Bounty with the crewmen aboard separated from the tow and was adrift for 2 days before being found by a search party. Yeah, I think that was the original one, the 1935 one. Then, after leaving Tahiti, the crew begins to talk of mutiny after Blight's harsh discipline leads to a death of the ship's beloved surgeon, Mr. Bacchus. Okay, I cracked up when I read that. Mr. Bacchus. Bacchus is Dionysus, right? He's the doctor. And Blythe severely cuts water rationing to the crew in favor of providing more water for the breadfruit plants. So yeah, so the plants are more important than the people. However, when the British ship HMS Pandora is spotted approaching, Brim and Christian decide they must part ways. So anyhow, Christian ends up creating a mutiny, and I went in all the history of this. I'm not going to go into it if you guys want to research it. It's like a whole team of them decided to go against him, but some stayed with Blythe, and then some ended up staying in Tahiti and didn't go on with Fletcher Christian. But guess what they did? They put Blythe in like a boat, in a dinghy boat, and let him adrift at sea. And he made it back to Tahiti. They never thought he would be alive, right? I guess they didn't think he would live it. But he gets back to Tahiti, then gets back to London, and basically all hell breaks loose because they come and they try to find them. But they couldn't find them for years. They were hiding on an island. So they're saying here, Captain Blythe knew when there was scurvy happening because of his knowledge of being on Captain James Cook's ship. So, it wasn't a nice lifestyle being a Navy officer back in those days. It must have been horrific. So then, in the final scene of the film, Christian gives a rousing speech to his fellow mutineers, speaking of creating a perfect society of free men on Pitcairn, away from Blythe and the Navy. But what ends up happening is Tahitian men were needed, and they brought Tahitian women on the island, but there wasn't a balance in men to women. So the Tahitian men ended up getting angry because one of the mutineer women died, and then they wanted to take one of the Tahitian women, for themselves. So it was all a fight over women that ended up destroying their society, because they lived on this island for years, and the Navy couldn't find them. It was like it's off their radar. I guess it was just a small island, and they lived there. I think it was almost like 30 years before they got caught. So the Bounty returned to Tahiti on 22nd of September. The welcome was much less effusive than previously. The Tahitian had learned from the crew of the visiting British ship that the story of Captain Cook. So they ended up being 20 Polynesian, of whom 14 were women with them, and there was 9 mutineers. The 16 sailors on Tahiti began to organize their lives, one group led by Morrison. So they ended up creating this whole society on Pitcairn. Now, Pitcairn was named from a young boy, and his father was a sailor, and he spotted the island, and it was named Pitcairn. But yeah, so Blythe reported the mutiny to authorities and wrote to his wife, "Know then, my own dear Belsie, I have lost the Bounty." So then his cook died, the botanist died, and then on August 20th, the party departed for Batavia, now Chakera, to await a ship for Europe. So yeah, and he ends up, and then basically all hell breaks loose because they're upset at what happened, because Captain Cook gets murdered, and then Blythe gets taken over by the mutineers. It's just looking bad for the British Empire, so they have to go and try to find these bad mutineers and punish them. Right, this is part of their mission now. Pitcairn is the least populous national jurisdiction in the world. The Bounty mutineers and a handful of Tahitian consorts, as is still apparent from some of the surnames of many of the islanders. This famous mutiny and its aftermath has been the subject of many books and films. As of January 2020, there were 47 permanent inhabitants of the island. They tried to make the society peaceful. John Adams and Ned Young turned to their scriptures using the ship's Bible. He was the longest surviving member, was John Adams, ironically, right? Because of, I guess, his spiritual beliefs and trying to always stay, in peace. The main Picton difficulty to find are highlighted by the failure of Captain James Cook to locate the island in July 1773. So yeah, so this happened. James Cook was trying to locate this island in 1773, and then this all happened later on. So I guess because James Cook couldn't find it, they were having a hard time finding it. It was just difficult to find. So they were looking for Pitcairn Island, and they found another island from when they were on the HMS Pandora. Dulce Island was rediscovered in 1791 by Royal Navy Captain Edwards while searching for the Bounty mutineers. He named it after, I don't know, a Baron Dulce. So the Pitcairn Islanders reported it was not until 27th of December 1795 that the first ship since the Bounty was seen from the island, but it did not approach the land, and they could not make out the nationality. The second ship appeared in 1801 and made no attempt to communicate with them. A third came significantly near to see their houses, or their house, but did not try to send a boat on shore. And finally, the American sealing ship Topaz, under Matthew Folger, became the first to visit the island when the crew spent 10 hours on Picton on February 1808. Whalers subsequently became regular visitors to the island. The last recorded whaler to visit was the James Arnold in 1888. The report of Folger's discovery was forwarded to the Admiralty, mentioning the mutineers and giving a more precise location of the island. Okay, so then they got caught. And then, this is years later, right? So, yeah, so this is in 1814. And when it happened, yeah, it's like almost like 30 years later. So there was like kids born and, a whole society by this time. So traditionally, Pitcairn Islands, considered the island, officially became the British colony on November 30th, 1838, at the same time becoming one of the first territories to extend voting for women. So interesting history, but now there's supposed to be like, abuse and incest, I guess eventually being isolated like that for long periods of time, it's gonna eventually fall apart, This is the society in 1916. Fletcher Christian was actually, attacked and killed by the natives that were with him, all over the women, I guess. And this is his son. And he named his son Thursday October Christian because he didn't want anything to do with how, the British Navy, how they name people or whatever. So he was born on a Thursday in October, so he called him Thursday October. Thursday's Child, right? So it's funny that David Bowie did a song called Thursday's Child, but he was born on a Thursday as well. And this is what he really looked like. Okay, he only lived, he actually lived 1820 to 1911. Wow, yeah, he was pretty old. So yeah, he was probably one of the first children born there. Now this all ties into the shot heard around the world, and I know the 17th letter movement had that as a post. Okay, so it was the Battle of Lexington, the fire, the shot heard around the world, and died from wounds after the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775. Okay, so his naval career, Pitcairn served on the HMS Emerald. Okay, and on Thursday the 2nd, July 1767, Pitcairn was the first person on the Swallow to spot the island in the Pacific. He was just 15 years old at the time. So he was the one that the island was named after. But yeah, his father, John Pitcairn, in 1722 to 1775. So this was all to do, this was what started the War of Independence, right? The shot heard around the world. That was what started the war, for the War of Independence. So it's, it's creating civil war, right? It's all tying into this whole story of Captain Cook and then the Mutiny of the Bounty, and then the shot heard around the world, and then Socrates, and then, it's all to do with the Republic and being able to get out of these controls of New World Order, right? It's like getting away from this kind of suppression that you must follow and you don't have a voice. So it's kind of ironic, right? Major Pitcairn, the British officer on horseback, had ordered the colonists to disarm and disperse. As they began to do so, a single shot was fired, which led to an exchange of fire between the British platoon and the colonial militia. 8 militiamen were killed and 10 wounded before Pitcairn regained control of his troops. Thus, the American Revolution started, with the quote, "The shot heard around the world." Now, this Fies is in the Rotunda building. The United States Capitol contains the painted panorama depicting significant events in the American history. So isn't it ironic? This is the guy who his platoon started the American Revolution, right? Because they were, shot into the colonists, and his son found this island where the island was named. He spotted this island where the mutineers that were like revolting against the control of the British go and live for decades. Like, how ironic is that? That's pretty funny. The phrase "a shot heard around the world" was also used in 1914 when Ferdinand was shot, and this was what started the World War I. So they're still using his name in pop culture because he's in a lot of these video games. Temple of the Order, yeah, in Assassin's Creed 3. So yeah, they're using him. So, obviously he has huge relevance to the history of America. Here you can see where Pitcairn Islands are off Australia. And there it is here. They have all where James Adam, the last survivor of the mutineers, was buried. And they also have the anchor of the Bounty. They ended up burning the Bounty so they couldn't be spotted. That was part of their, I think they were crying when they did that because they knew they would never be able to leave the island. There's a cool movie about them, 1936 documentary. Yeah, so it's pretty amazing that they lived there for that long, not under the British rule. It's like they were on the Emerald Isle, right? But there's either older history to the island that's with the natives, so it's a very special place. Now, the Mutiny of the Bounty was released on November 8th, and November 8th, is with this blood moon this year. And Donald Trump, every time he did a rally after he first won, for years after, he kept going, "Wasn't that an amazing day? Wasn't that an amazing day?" Every time he started a rally, he would say that. And I was like, why does he keep talking about the day? Like, why is he going on and on about it? But I think he's trying to hint to November 8th, and this represents freedom, right? It represents the Mutiny of the Bounty. You're no longer part of the Matrix. The movie The Ten Commandments in 1956 was also released on November 8th. So it's a very important date. And I do believe it's because it ends up being the number 88, and 88 is Mercury, that's its orbit. And the two eights are the two timelines, right? And you get to that 0 point, you can jump timelines. Mercury represents your mind. It's the apex of the Philosopher's Stone. He also rules your throat, your freedom to speak, your will to speak, or your need to speak your truth. So he's communication, he's your mind, he's also healing, and he's also finance. That's kind of weird, but yeah, that's what all represents Mercury. He's your left logical brain. And Venus, Taurus, actually rules the finance house, your house of possessions. So it's really the hermaphrodite balancing your left and right brain so you can use intuition and logic through these times and speak your truth. Now, what's really funny is, of course, The Simpsons did a whole thing about the Mutiny of the Bounty. So it's all ties. They arrive in in Tahiti, where Homer and Marge are the rulers of the island, and the crew have a wonderful time until it's time to leave. Blythe continues to abuse the crew, leading to first mate Bart Christian to begin the mutiny, sending Blythe and Willie off in a lifeboat. Yeah, because that's, that's what they did to him. Willie berates Blythe for not listening to him in the first place, but this only angers Blythe to abuse Willie, who furiously turns on him and sends him off in the lifeboat on a sea turtle, who drowns him after he begins abusing the turtle. Bart, as the new captain of the Bounty, orders the crew to sail to Tahiti, but after throwing away the ship's helm, they end up in Antarctica. Okay, so I'm just like, okay, this is hilarious. So is Antarctica paradise? Is that, the inner Earth entrance, to paradise? I don't know. It's just crazy. So then they have another episode. Later on the night, the family realizes that the sea captain is not coming with their food, with Bart begrudgingly pointing out that he is playing basketball with his waiters. Homer tells the final story of the parody in the 1972 film The Poseidon Adventure, taking place on the luxurious liner SS Neptune on New Year's Eve during the 1970s. So this is crazy because it's tying in Neptune, right? And Neptune is the god of storms, the sea storm, right? And he's also Christ consciousness. He represents the storm, but he also represents your your divinity. You're able to heal yourself in a shamanic way because you can go into your dream state and heal yourself, right? So it's to do with dreaming and envisioning what you want. So it's also can put you in a fog. That's the negative side of it, But he is Christ consciousness. So at midnight, Captain Burns fails to notice a massive freak wave. So they're talking about a tsunami, right? Poseidon adventure, you're drowning. This freak wave, which hits the bridge, capsizing the ship and killing most of the passengers. So the rest, and then it goes on here, the rest of the group makes it off the ship, at which point they encountering the walking skeletons of the Bounty crew who are still trying to get back to Tahiti. Yeah, so it's like, oh my God, they're tying this all in. I'm just kind of like, The Simpsons. So yeah, it's all tied to the Mutiny of the Bounty and whether you can get to the Emerald Isle. And I think it's all to do with your belief systems, really, where you want to end up. If you're, I'm not showing you guys this to make create it. I'm just showing you to see that it is there so you can be kind of like not attached to it. So you can just watch it happen. It's not to go like, oh my God, because then you will create it, right? So if we all kind of, it's like that experiment, if you're watching the atom, it moves. Okay, so it's like if you're watching it, it might not happen because we can see it, right? And we have no emotion to it. So that's kind of my theory on it all. But who knows, I don't know if the script just runs and we have no effect on it, but I don't think so. I think the whole point is that you create this reality and you're either going to go on one timeline or another, depending on what your belief systems are. But they're showing us that it's coming to a pinnacle head. And I do think that with the Neptune-Jupiter conjunction happening this year, and then the Venus point, and the Venus-Mars conjunction on Valentine's Day, which I will do another video about Valentine's Day on that. It's all tying in to the repetitive story of Captain Cook and the Mutiny Bounty and Socrates. It's all there. And Jimmy Hoffa, the truck convoy, we're watching it repeat itself because it's repetitive through the sky. Kepler and everybody was obsessed with the Venus transits, okay? Now, the Venus transits have a math repetitive pattern, okay? So they go on a 243-year cycle. So first there's two Venus transits that happen. So that's this 8 years apart. Then it goes for 105.5 years, and then there's another two, 8 years apart. And then it goes for 121.5 years. And that creates one cycle of the Venus transits. Now, they only happen in June and December. And they're inferior conjunction, which is a Venus point. So they're part of the Venus points. Now, if you take Captain Cook's death, right, the year that he died, to this year, it's exactly 243 years, right? Even though he was looking at this Venus transit, I think it was in 1769, which would have brought it to 2012. There was a Venus transit in 2012. So you can look at it like that. That's 243 years. But his death it goes from February 14th, Valentine's Day, to this February 14th, Valentine's Day. So that's another 243 years. So it's just capturing the same time span. So I'm just kind of like, whoa, it's 10 years after the last Venus transit. We're not going to have another one until, 2001, something, 25, I think. So it's not in our lifetime. So I'm just like, wow, okay, this is like really tying into Venus again. Everything's about Venus. They're obsessed with Venus, okay, because of the pentagram that she makes. And she ties to Taurus, right? She makes Venus Earth conjunctions is the constellation Taurus, the toroidal field, the labyrinth. It's the bull, okay? And this is where these transits happen. They happen in Taurus, or they happen in like Scorpio, Ophiuchus. Okay, so this is like the labyrinth, or the way out is Ophiuchus, right? Is the doorway. It's your house of transformation, eighth house. Okay, Venus rules your third eye. Okay, it's so yeah, so there you go. So this is why it's so important. So yeah, Valentine's Day is going to be interesting. We have a snow full moon 2 days after, on February 16th, and it's in the mouth of the lion, right on Regulus, which is the king star. Okay, so the guy that is organizing the whole convoy, his name is Pat King. You can follow him on the real Pat King, and he's doing updates all the time, what's going on there. So the fact that the full moon is happening on the King star, the Leo King Regulus star, it's the crown in alchemy, that star. So I'm just like, whoa, this is just getting too bizarro. But yeah, it seems like it's all mirroring the history. Now, what I like about Pat King is that he knows that the police are trying to provoke them, and he's just trying to stay calm and laugh at it. So, yeah, they've done quite a few things, stolen fuel, they've put snipers up on buildings, they're just trying to intimidate. So the strength card is when the hand is in the lion's mouth. Now, the moon is in the mouth of the lion on February 16th, 2 days after Valentine's Day. And the strength card represents you handle every moment with maturity, without making haste. Okay, so I'm just trying to read this. It gives you strength, and you can face any challenge. So it's like you're not going to be like in a state of rash, impulsive reaction with your emotions. The moon represents your emotions. So when it's in the king, you're very kind of like regal about it and noble about it. It's interesting. They also have the tiger representing the lion here in one of these cards. So we're in the year of the tiger. So it's all very symbolic. Now, the February moon is actually known as a snow moon because it's a lot of snow happens in February, but there's also other names for it. And one of them is the hunger moon. Now, if these trucking strikes continue and they're starting to block some of the borders, there will be a shortage of food. So we're into the hunger moon because it's difficult to hunt when there's a lot of snow, right? So this is why it was called the hunger moon as well. So right at the time when Captain Cook was arriving in Hawaii on his first stop there, before he left and his ship broke down and he came back around Valentine's Day, they were celebrating their worship to their lunar god. I didn't put that in this video, but I had mentioned it in another video. So anyhow, the moon happened to be in the mouth of the lion on the king star Regulus at the same time. So it's really mirroring this year. So anyhow, this is pretty amazing because we're right on a 243 cycle. The moon is in the same spot, and we're in the exact same period as Venus transit, 243 years. Exactly 10 years after the last transit, exactly 10 years after 2012 transit. So yeah, that's exactly it. So he died 10 years after his transit that he saw, and it's like exactly mirroring it. It's absolutely amazing. So the February full moon was on February 1st for him. and the Hunger Moon, and then our February full moon is on February 16th, 2 days after Valentine's Day. So, but it's still amazing. It's the February full moon in the same location. So I do feel like we're in the albedo, the second stage of alchemy, which is ruled by the full moon, the white, it's the light, it's the Neptune, it's Christ consciousness. It's to do with, standing up for your rights and having the light shine on the darkness. And that's what's really happening worldwide is like everybody's trying to watch what's going on here in Canada, and then it's inspiring so many other countries to kind of stand up and say enough is enough. We want our ability to decide how we want to live, right? And not always be in fear of dying. So now this brings water, okay, because it's Neptune. And there's this representation that the second phase is the washing. It's the washing away of the pain and the suffering, and you're overcoming that. So with The Simpsons, this whole the wettest story ever told, and they're tying this all into Neptune and the adventure. It doesn't have to mean it's going to manifest with some type of disaster, and make people drown or whether it can just be symbolic of the second stage of alchemy, which is the clearing away, right? So I don't know how it's going to manifest. I'm just sitting here watching it, but all I know is the phases of alchemy are being projected at us right now, and it's being represented this year in the sky, especially with the Neptune-Jupiter conjunction in April, right? So we have a lot going on in the sky, and it's all very exciting. So I don't want to spread fear or anything. I find it actually inspiring that the mutineers, the mutiny of the Bounty, actually had the courage to do what they did and just go and try to escape the matrix. The fact that they did that for decades, is like, wow. Can you imagine going to live on an island and nobody knows you're there? It sounds like paradise to me. But anyhow, I wish you guys bliss, and thanks for sending me stuff, and appreciate it. And thank you so much for taking readings. We're working on the website today. Oh my God, I'm so excited. So we're getting that starting. I think we're going to get close to finishing, or getting closer to finishing it. And so I've got a couple of recordings done of the school. So I'm hoping it's going to start to pull together now. So that's all very good news. And I know some of you guys have been asking me, and I'm thank you for your patience, but you know how these things are. It's like, it's not all on me. I'm relying on other people, and people have lives. And so, we just have to kind of go with the flow here on that. So bliss to you guys, and happy Valentine's Day. It's coming up, and I'll try to get this Venus-Mars video out ASAP before Valentine's Day as well. So you'll have another one shooting down the tube soon. Take care. Bye.